Salam, everyone. My name is Reza. Welcome to the Samovar Network's discussion called Facing Fear. The Samovar Network is a platform for Afghan Americans to discuss issues affecting our diaspora. Tonight, we're going to be discussing the recent tragedy of the murder of Nabra Hassanen in the DMV area. The reason why this affects Afghans, 99.99% of us are Muslim. Many of us come from the DMV area. This is a hub of our diaspora, and we want to be able to discuss topics like this in a timely manner.
Thank you, Reza. My name is Nura, and I wanted to emphasize that I think because for this week, we're still processing what's been happening. And the thing that makes the Samovar Network unique is that we've gone into these spaces before. When things have happened in Kabul, we get on a call right away. When things were happening in Baltimore, we were processing it. And to me, what makes this conversation special is we don't have an agenda, but for Afghans, one of the ways that we mourn is as a collective. We discuss things, and that's how we process. So our intention to have the conversation tonight is really to take a moment. That's why our conversation is intimate. It's just four of us to go through some of the feelings and reflections we have, because this is raw, this is real. We're still finding things out. So our intention here is just to build a space where we can really speak frankly and candidly as a way for us to process together and move on.
That was perfect. Thank you for saying that, Nora. Just to get some intros out of the way, Lita, could you speak a little bit more about what you do and who you are?
Hi, I'm Lita Azim. I'm from the Bay Area, California. I am the outreach coordinator for CARE SFBA. I also have another job at this lovely place with the yellow background, and I work with kids, so that's it.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Arash. I am from the Washington, D.C., Northern Virginia area. Work for an international broadcaster, and yeah.
Great. And Nura again, I live in Durham, North Carolina. I'm a PhD candidate in race and ethnic politics.
And salam, everyone. Once again, my name is Reza. I'm a medical student in New Hampshire. So the first question that I wanted to pose to the panel is just a check-in, asking how are we doing and what are we feeling right now? So just to kick us off, me personally, I think that right now what I'm feeling is a little overwhelmed, because there have been a lot of reactions, and then reactions to the reactions, and then reactions to the reactions to the reactions within the community. And I think that for me, seeing this tragedy play itself out over the past week has really brought home a lot of the fears that I've had since November's election of President Trump. So, but I want to hear from the rest of you.
Arash, you're from Adams, right? You grew up there in Adams community?
Yeah, I did. I grew up there with some of my best friends. I think I met most of my best friends there and spent a lot of time there. And you know, Adams, just to give some background on Adams, it's just, first of all, it's a big community. It's a very diverse community. It's probably one of the more diverse mosques. The best friends that I met there, they were Indonesian and Bengali and Pakistani and African American and Sudanese and Afghan. And it's just, it's a big community, but it's also like everybody knows each other because everybody goes there for Ramadan, for example, and everybody goes there. The young kids go there because their parents make them to, and they're very young, right?
Yeah.
And then we go there to play basketball. So there's like a variety of reasons why people.
It's a community center, right? Like,
yeah, so
it's not just a mosque.
No, it's a lot of things. it's informally and formally a lot of different things, and I think people need to also realize that, like, for my friends, they never wanted to be there. They were like 7 or 8 or 10 years old, and then by like age 13 or 14, we were there to like play basketball and to hang out with each other. By that time, we had become friends. So it serves a lot of different purposes for the community in the Sterling, and then it has a bunch of different hubs as well.
I mean, I knew about Adams community growing up in Toledo, Ohio, because we had people in our community that were from Adams that had like gotten married and moved to our community, and we modeled a lot of things from, there's just like this discourse between the communities. So Adams to me is synonymous with American Islam. And I think my emotions are really raw right now because when I was a teenager, my friends and I would leave Qiyam and go get donuts at Krispy Kreme and walk back. Like the process of putting myself in the shoes of the teenagers is something that it's hard for me to say out loud because of I was that person, and I still don't know how I feel about it. Like, because the degree to which this hits home to me is one that I didn't realize they would hit home. But my masjid was a community center like Adams, and we looked up to Adams. So if Adams is not safe, what does that say for other community centers? That's sort of the questions going through my mind right now. And Lida, you're on, like, I know Lida's on the ground with CARE in California and knows the spectrum of communities there. So hopefully we can kind of loop her in. But Reza, was your mom, like, did you have community centers like that in SoCal, or like?
I wouldn't know. I think the thing that's different between me and the way that Arash grew up or the way that you grew up, notice that I didn't grow up in this kind of a masjid community. The way that I experienced Islam was very singular and in the home. So now that I'm older, I'm experiencing Islam in this very much bigger, community scale. And I think that me entering into it this late and this recently, that's one of the reasons why it hits hard for me, because I thought this was, I'm new to this, and to see this rocking the community the way it is, it's new for me. But Lida, I wanted to hear how you're doing and how you're feeling.
So for me, I never really had a community that I grew up with. Like, I was moving around a lot when I was a kid. So to me, as of right now, it hits home because I'm so involved with CARE, and I go to like different masjids around the Bay Area, and I'm just like, man, these are people I see almost every day during Ramadan. And like, I have friends and they're on Twitter and they're freaking out. And it's just really concerning and scared. And I feel like it could be anyone, right? Like, Nora and I were on the call, I think, no, we're in the actually a group message. And like, we started talking about getting an app so we know where everyone is at a certain time.
Yeah.
And that's scary, right? Like, that's just like, hey, Nora, like, just text one of us if you're going to leave late.
And so you mentioned that you're texting Nura, right? That, hey, when are you going to leave, and to keep track of each other. That brings up the gendered component of this violence that was committed. And I was wondering if Lida or you, Nura, could explore that a little more and really walk us through how the violence that was committed is gendered and the history of that within the Muslim community. Yeah.
I think for me, I'm a little stubborn when it comes to saying like, hey, I need help walking to the car. To me, I'm like, I can do it on my own. But after this happened, like, it's one of those things, like, maybe it would be helpful to have someone that's a guy that's walking you to your car, right? I've seen my own executive director at CARE, like, I've seen her speak at a public event and have a man verbally assault her and like be very demeaning towards her. and it's like one of those things, like she's also very independent. It's like, okay, do I need to have someone with me walking from this venue to my car now? I see, that's the thing, like I want to say no, we don't need it, but I think we do. Do you want to add in, Nora?
Yeah, I think that the conversation around domestic violence, sexual assault, violence against women is one that American society has not handled well. So Muslim or not, or of other faith or non-faith, it's something that we don't address to the degree that we need to, or how gendered violence looks. And we as Muslims are not immune to that, right? And so regardless of who you are as a woman, there is always this fear. And then when you label on the other parts, so you're a woman and you add on your identity as a brown woman. And then in my case, you add on the layer of hijab. And I live in North Carolina. I live 10 minutes away from where we had our own tragedy a few years ago in Chapel Hill. And the thing about this specific event was Sunday, I remember I was going on a run, and I do these long distance runs on the weekend, and I always make sure to wear a university baseball cap over my hijab. And it's not because of the sun, it's because I want to make sure I look less Muslim. Let's be honest. I'm running, my music is loud, and when I got in my car after the run, I was talking to my sister and I said, dude, I'm so paranoid. Like, I take these extra precautions and I sometimes feel guilty that I'm disguising my hijab with a baseball cap. And then I heard the news and I'm like, no, like, this is necessary. And it really sucks that this is necessary. But that's when the conversation on the apps with Lita happened, because it's like, actually what I was doing wasn't sufficient. And now I need to tell people when I'm going on these long distance runs, because if they can't find me, God knows what happens. Like, I cross streets, trucks pass by. And in Durham this semester, a Muslim student almost got run over by a car and a racial slur was yelled at them. Yesterday, a hijabi was driving home and got road rage and was tailgated, and she was with her mom and they had to call the cops. So for me, it's not like, Sunday exemplifies a lot of the things that have already been happening around us, and it affects women in a really pernicious way. And I don't know, I think we need to have more conversations of what to do.
And as on top of so I come into this conversation with a lot of privilege. I think I don't have any. I'm a male. I don't have any facial hair. I don't look necessarily white, but I don't think you would identify me automatically as Muslim. And I had to catch myself this week because I was really upset and sad and angry and all these different emotions and feelings, because I walked that exact trail that they walked to McDonald's and IHOP. It's where I went to high school, right? Like, when I skipped class, we took that route. When we went to Adams, we took that route. I walked that. I've driven that path and driven on that road so many times. But our women are much more, if you were to identify a Muslim, you would identify a woman first and foremost. And on top of that, I think there was a lot of reaction within our community and other communities as well that was like, hey, it was done because she was Muslim. And one thing that was said at the vigil yesterday in Reston, where I think at least 1,000 people showed up, her cousin went on stage and she said, I want people to remember that she was a beautiful Muslim Nubian woman. So, she was Egyptian, she was from North Africa, she was visibly black. And I think that's probably the one part that has been downplayed. We've had maybe a discussion about, was it Islamophobia? Was it explicitly anti-Islam? But race, as always, black women are a target. And that seems to be an under-discussed part of this week's discussion.
I mean, in general, black women are probably, if you think universally who has the biggest struggles, like if you talk to critical race theorists on an academic level, black women are the ones that face the brunt of a lot of the issues that happen. And I think you're right, Arash, we don't talk about that enough. Like, that is a serious reality for black women in America and outside of America. And Islamophobia is a form of racism now. And I think if we have to connect the dots, and we haven't connected the dots, and until we connect the dots of how these systems work together, we're being naive. And I think a lot of it's like, yeah, we're processing this week, but we're processing an isolated incident that's coming after a series of incidents that aren't stopping. So like making that connection as a community, like we can't afford to not know anymore. Like there's things on an elementary level that we don't have an awareness of as communities that we need to, like Lita, you guys do know your rights campaigns. Like I think that's, you don't have the privilege of not knowing your rights. And I don't know if you can speak to that or what community members' reactions are, Lita, when you tell community members to be aware of these conversations.
I'm gonna be honest, like we have mixed reactions. Some people think we live in California and we're in the Bay Area and there's a huge bubble, and there is, right? But it shouldn't stop you from knowing your rights. So when something like this does happen, then you should be able to know what's going on and what you can do. But there's some people that are actually really grateful for us, and they like go to us and they're happy and they're thankful, and it makes everything worth it, right? Like, you know, the care, as you know, can be a little controversial. So I think some people are like, yeah, I like care, and some people are like, no, I don't like care. But like honestly, those people who come out to us and like express their gratitude, it makes everything worth it. But every day, like tonight, I'm going to a masjid after this, and it's a big one. It's one of the biggest one in California. So I'm excited and nervous to see their reactions to this. Like I want to also figure out how they feel about this almost a week later. And now that like she could have been raped now, right? They're still trying to figure that out. So it's like a new dimension to this.
I wanted to explore the intersection of her religion and her race a little bit more. There was a comment by Sumaya on the Facebook page, and I'm just going to read it verbatim so I don't misquote her. She said, even if this horrific crime started with road rage, it certainly ended with hate. Had she not been a young woman wearing hijab, I wonder if the outcome would have been the same. Muslims are portrayed as disposable, and I can't help but to think this monster did what he did because of that portrayal. When you mentioned connecting the dots, Noura, is that what you mean by connecting the dots, what Sumaya said?
So in the same way that Black community organizers are talking about how it's not safe to be Black and drive, there's implicit bias that the cop reaches for their gun quicker when they see a Black driver than if it was a non-Black driver. That sort of bias. So even if that wasn't the primary motivation, when you live in a racialized country, it's always going to be there and penetrate in your subconscious. And like, if people don't know what implicit bias is, Harvard Implicit Association Test. It's fun. It takes 5 minutes. Take it. You will be shocked at how much bias is within us, even though like I'm going to run around and say I'm not biased. I am, because I'm a product of the society I live in. And so it would be naive for us to separate it. So I thank Sumaya for the comment, because I think she hits it head on. Like, you can't remove the role that race and Islamophobia play. Like it enters people's psychology now, and that's something that, at least for race scholars, critical race theorists, people who study race and psychology, it's something that's almost it's one of the things we actually agree upon. We don't agree on a lot of things, but that's one of the things we agree on. And I wonder what others think about that, like Arash, Lita, when you hear that comment.
I mean, the problem is also that like these things, gender, race, they play a role whether we want it or not, right? They play a role in our mosques. It's like it's there whether you want to talk about it or not. Like gender is an issue, right? Race, whether you want to talk about it or not, it's an issue. And this kind of has brought that to the forefront and has kind of maybe exposed that. And maybe now it's time to have that discussion. And in a lot of our mosques, women are not given the amount of power or like the prominent roles that they deserve. Men are brought to the forefront, and in a lot of our mosques, African Americans are not welcomed, right? Or it's a lot of our mosques are very they're different communities, and it's hard when it's not diverse. And I was just lucky enough to go to a mosque where there were Puerto Ricans and Indonesians and African Americans and Afghans and Bengalis and just every nationality you could find. And I think that's why also like Adams was and Adams still is a special place. And at the Janazah on the other day, I mean, people were in the parking lot, literally, because that's how packed it was, and that's how our community came together.
We've talked about race and gender, but I also want to talk about some of the reactions that we've seen online that are downplaying it. They're downplaying that social context. And so I think my question is, why do we think that there are some within the Muslim community who are quick to downplay the racial and gendered aspects of this attack? And I would put that up to Noura, to Lida, to Arash, any one of you.
I mean, I think that people want to protect their community. So I think that I understand when people say that let's wait for law enforcement to assess the situation. Because if I were someone who was in a leadership position, I would want to make sure that my community feels safe and protected. And I would want the narrative to be my community's and not one that other people take a hold of. So I don't know the background story of the context of Adams. I'm simply an outsider looking in now. Like, I used to live in Vienna for a quick minute and go there, but I don't know. So I can see, so I don't want to disregard some of the real feelings that people in the community have, but I do think that we have to come to terms with the fact that what happens to one Muslim in one part of the country is going to affect all of us. What happened in Portland to those girls in Portland left me as emotionally like in shock as this is, right? And so it's this notion, Black scholars called linked fate. What happens to one member in a Black community affects the outcome of others because of institutionalized racism. So you see this sort of notion of linked fate occurring for Black Americans, and now I sort of see this like, I understand there's a local community, but our fates are linked given how programs like NSEERS and the Patriot Act institutionally look at all of us as one lump, even though we are not one community, and we do have problems, and we have racial segregation and gender segregation and class segregation. So those are the complications I see.
And I also think that it's like, and I'll start by emphasizing that I'm speaking purely from my own point of view when I say this, but Adams is a large community, and there's different segments that are better represented and some segments that are not represented racially, and in so many different ways, racially and gender as well. And you know, the family that this happened to, they were Egyptian, they're North African, and for people to say something like, hey, we should wait out, and this is what I read, and I read this account, eyewitness account. Information nowadays is weaponized. One person's account, one outlet's account, whether it be Washington Post or something you read online, somebody's Facebook status, everything is almost equal now. So information is weaponized, and we need to be really careful about how we tread and use that and spread that online, whether somebody's Facebook status or somebody's opinion somewhere on Twitter. And also the fact that this family said it was a hate crime, and then people within the mosque said, hey, we trust the Fairfax County Police, and we trust...
Oh, so that happened.
Right. So
okay.
The family basically came out, the father came out and he said, I think this is Islamophobia, and I think this is what the attack, and it's because she was a young girl and she was, you know, an easier target. And the mosque came out and they stood broadly, and Adams has a pretty good relationship with law enforcement, Department of Homeland Security, has a good reputation in that regard. But if for somebody to make a comment like, hey, let's wait for the law enforcement and we're gonna like follow their investigation, well, the guys I went to Adams with, shout out to Muhammad and Charles, they were pulled over leaving Adams because they were black.
Wow.
So, there's dynamics to this at play. There's racial dynamics and all these dynamics. They're not going to trust what Fairfax County Police are going to say about this. So maybe that's something to think about as well.
I'm wondering how the reaction from the Adams community has contrasted or has paralleled the reaction from the wider Muslim community. If Lita, you're in Northern California, has the reaction there sort of mirrored what Arash has been talking about?
So I hate to say it, but I think a lot of mosques aren't surprised, because even the mosques that are here, they've upped security, especially during Ramadan. And some prayers last past midnight, right? And so this is what happened to her. So it's just like, I think especially now people are upping the security even more. So Reza, you and I started the same way. Like, I wasn't into this community so much. So when I started going to the masjid, I was like, why are there so many security guards? Why do they have dogs that smell any sort of like bombs, right? Like, it's scary and it's like a religious institution, and yet we have to have these sort of security measures. So I don't think it really surprised the Muslim community too much. I think how bad the crime was more shocking. The fact that she was assaulted twice and was put in the pond, like, that's just cruel.
Yeah, I mean, you brought up that, like, we mentioned the same thing about not really being raised in the community. I think that ever since 9/11, I've kind of always associated Muslim spaces with upped security, like more security. I remember at my aunt's wedding, which happened a year-ish after 9/11, we had like security guards at the wedding, just walking around
Wow.
with like dogs and stuff. Yeah. And this was in Hayward-ish area. It was in the Bay. And so, like, I've always associated Muslim spaces with increased security. So I think that I really resonate with the fact that what was shocking was the nature of the crime, and the things that are coming out from the police department about what happened to Nabra are still something that kind of rock me. But I think the thing that I am struggling with personally is the reaction from the community on Facebook, which is what I'm more connected to, because there's a very active Muslim community on Facebook, and this Muslim community on Facebook has been talking to each other quite a bit, specifically around the language that the police used, right, to describe the attack, road rage versus hate crime. And I think I wanted to dive into that specifically. What does it mean both for the Adams communities, like specifically the Adams community, but also for the wider Muslim community, to have this incident designated as a hate crime or as road rage? And to, I guess, whoever wants to tackle that, but Arash, you know the Adams community best.
Yeah, so even before the facts come out, I think people have a very justified fear because of what happened in Chapel Hill, because of the rhetoric by politicians. Not even the person that won the Republican candidacy in the presidency, but it was another one. They were one-upping each other and calling for safeguarding Muslim neighborhoods. And we kind of all know that there's not even such a thing as like Muslim neighborhoods in the United States. Maybe in other countries. On that same weekend, I think it was Monday, somebody in London does the copycat thing and rents a van and runs over Muslims. At the same time, in different communities, people are attacked because of their religion, specifically Islam. And all across the Middle East, Muslims are dying. So for people to react emotionally is not irrational at all. It's very rational to think you are being targeted and to feel like you're being targeted. Perception is reality. And in this case, it's more than just perception. People are being attacked for their own religion, and women are at the front lines of that. And I guess the legal statutes for hate crimes might differ from what we consider hate crimes, you know, because in the Chapel Hill shooting was never classified as a hate crime. It was considered a parking incident, and this is more than meets the eye, like, and what our law enforcement authorities say. It's not just, we all know it's not just, or we have at least the feeling that it's not just road rage. Road rage does not mean somebody gets dumped or beaten with a metal bat and dumped in a pond in Sterling, Virginia.
And I want to return, I think my initial gut reaction, I was on a panel at Duke Law with the attorney representing the family of the Chapel Hill victims, and there are, when you don't call it a hate crime, you're almost affirming that something didn't happen to the family. They've lost something. They've been violated in a way that, and I'm not trying to speak for anyone's family, this is just my sense of it, that do not take away from the pain they're feeling is because of this extra layer. And I think one is this issue of the pain that these families feel. And I don't know, at least last year when we were in conversation with the attorney, that was something that they were really trying to figure out, is symbolism matters a lot more than people think. And second, when this happened right after Philando Castile. So we can't talk about what happened Sunday night without talking about the verdict on the murder of Philando Castile. What does Philando Castile represent? A broken system of law enforcement. Black communities do not trust law enforcement. And so I find it interesting that when Muslims are waiting for a verdict from from law enforcement, when there is distrust amongst other community. And B, Reza, when you were talking about security, like I wonder, like Arash, to your point of your friends getting pulled over at the mosque, like when we have security on site, is it really protecting everybody? Like, do Black teenagers, when they walk in the mosque and see a cop car outside, do they feel safe? Or does that bring up the fears they have when they see these things on TV? So it's really interesting how we see law enforcement. And I think that's where I want us to connect the dots. Like, this conversation needs to happen with Philando Castile in mind and what's been happening with law enforcement. Like, we turn to them as a source of support, but we need to be critical and not forget that that's not how it works for every community, and even within our own community. Like, I wonder, like, Arash, do your friends feel safe if they walk into Adams and see a cop car there trying to protect them?
Yeah, first of all, you know, there's been armed security at Adams since, I don't want to speculate, but it's been a very, very long time. There's been armed security like every day for as long as I know. And I think we kind of, like I said, I think I had the privilege of having friends that were like skeptical of like authorities at Adams and law enforcement authorities in general. So for them, that this dynamic of like the police are here to help us, you know, we need to be skeptical of that, because these are, let's be honest, Adams has probably been under surveillance by different law enforcement authorities, probably federal ones, for a very long time. If you go to Adams more than once or every Friday, you should assume that there's authorities that know about that. So there's a lot of layers to this, and we should always remain skeptical.
Just something to add really quickly. What I've noticed is that a lot of mosques rather keep to themselves and be safe and work with law enforcement rather than enforce their own rights, right? Like, they don't have to be so willing to cooperate with law enforcement, but they think it's best to cooperate with them and build a relationship with them. And I think it's also kind of in the Muslim culture too, to be very to yourself and not to cause too much trouble. So I think that's something that really plays into this. To go back to that question, I think it's important to establish this as a hate crime because it makes it a standard. at this point, what happened in Portland and in other cities, I think people think they can get away with it. They can just get away with it thinking that it's road rage. I don't know what the heck these people said to this guy for him to cause such like pain to so many people and like to hurt this girl more than once, right? Like his intent was to kill her, and it seemed like you guys know what it is. It's a metal bat. Like that's really serious. So I think that's why it's really important.
So what I'm hearing is that there's this sense of distrust of law enforcement, but the powers that be at Adams and at other mosques are way more inclined to trust law enforcement because they want to be safe. They want to keep their heads down and keep moving. Where is that divide coming from, right? How is it? Like a generational divide? Is it a class divide? Is it a race divide? Like where is that divide coming from?
I think I can speak on that because I went to the vigil at DuPont Circle on Tuesday, and that was organized not by the immediate community, but it was organized by very young, brown, mostly Muslim activists and organizers. And they were very adamant about calling out the white feminist community and calling out law enforcement authorities and calling out Muslim men. And they said, you know, this is what happened and we need to face these realities. And they were very forward with that thinking. And most of their speakers were young women as well. Then I went to the vigil in Weston. And that was just much more like your traditional event that you would see. It was, they had the imam from Adams, who's wonderful, wonderful man, by the way. But you know, in the back there is the Fairfax County police officer or the head of police from Fairfax County Police, and then there's a bunch of other people that are speaking. That, you know, it's the divide is definitely generational and it's definitely noticeable. And I would always I feel I had qualms today speaking because I didn't know her and I don't know the family. And the people that organized that vigil and arresting it yesterday, it was the Muslim Student Association at South Lakes High School, where I spent 2 years. And they were a bunch of 15, 16, 17, and 18-year-olds who organized this awesome event. And they're the ones who should be heard. The Muslim Student Association, all her friends, who, by the way, are all like brown and black, North African, Sudanese. That's what her friend group was, exactly. And that's who should be heard. And they're the ones who should be listened to. They were the ones that were there.
I agree, Arash. This is the first time I actually feel uncomfortable talking about this because I feel selfish that that I have emotions when I know how much they're hurting. And I think we need to amplify their voices. And it's unfair that they have to grow up that quick and that at 15 and 16, they have to advocate on their friends. This is something that will shape their lives forever. It's robbed them of their youth. And I don't know how we grapple with that, but I think that's a reality and an attention that I'm glad you acknowledged. So I appreciate you mentioning that.
Noor, you mentioned Philando Castile and the verdict that came down so, like, I mean, almost like coinciding with this tragedy occurring. And I wanted to ask what the significance is of the fact that the perpetrator in Philando Castile's case and the perpetrator in this case, Nabra's case, was Latino, because there has been discussions amongst us in the Afghan community, I think amongst the Muslim community from what I've seen, about anti-Black, anti-Latino prejudice, and you know, how much of this, these two incidents coinciding with each other and having similar perpetrators, how much of that can stoke xenophobia against the undocumented? Ooh, so yeah, unpack the giant question I just gave you guys.
Can I amplify a friend's voice?
Yes, please.
This is from Miguel Garcia, who is a friend of a Latino race scholar at Duke, and he said this. He said that while not white, this terrible example in the case of Philando Castile, this terrible example of pathological anti-Blackness demonstrates to us that white supremacy can use non-Black people of color to uphold its systems of oppression. So when you join a police force as someone who's non-white, you're upholding a system of oppression. That's his perspective. And I want to uplift, because he's basically trying to bring the conversation of anti-Blackness within the Latino and Latina spaces, Latinx communities. And my biggest fear in this, and I mean, California has a big Latinx community. My biggest fear is for us to demonize people from that community. Because the thing is, like, we're all victim to upholding this system in some way. And for us, I wouldn't want us to repeat that. I think we should be very mindful not to demonize undocumented people, particularly because Muslims also have undocumented people within their communities, and Latinx people are also Muslim. The fastest growing rate of people converting to Islam are from Latinx communities. So we can't demonize our own. They're not like separate, they're ours too.
I think we should also note that ICE is targeting Latino undocumented communities. They're also deporting Iraqis. They're deporting Iraqi Christians, Iraqi Muslims, Iraqi Kurds. So that struggle in itself is a shared one. And there's people at Adams that are Latino, and you know, it's easy to put them in a box. And I think people get confused when they see I think it's easy to dismiss the trappings and the complexity of white supremacy when the person is not visibly white. So when it's not a visibly white police officer, and I think that's one of my takeaways was from Baltimore, where I spent some time after the unrest, I think 2 years ago, and is that white supremacy is such a complex machinery that's been so refined and has been at work for so long. White supremacy prefers it actually if it's people of color in positions of power, right? So Baltimore, for example, has a Black mayor and Black councilmen and like a lot of Black police officers. So when white supremacy is allowing faces of people of color to take that's even better for that system to operate. The police in Baltimore the Black police were always more cruel because this complexity, right? So we should not think that just because it's a Latino police officer or is a undocumented immigrant committing this crime, it's still the trappings of white supremacy. People should not be confused by what they visibly see or a mugshot. And I should also add that the Latino community, there's a lot of El Salvadorians, there's a lot of Bolivians in the Northern Virginia area. That's the two largest Latino communities. And they have done nothing but be supportive. And they've reached out to the family, and they've reached out to Adams community, showing their support. And so I would just like to know that, and I would like to push back against anybody who wants to use this particular incident of an undocumented citizen to kind of create a further divide instead of bridging the gap.
So what I'm hearing is that you don't have to be white to participate in white supremacy.
Yes.
Okay.
And that's why people need to read up on this stuff, because white supremacy sounds like a word liberals and lefties use. As soon as you hear white supremacy, you're like, oh, these leftists are talking. I promise you, political scientists are the most conservative human beings you'll find in academia, and they use the word white supremacy. So we all need to read up on what it is if we don't buy into it. You know, like this is real, and we need to like wake up to it. So
I'm going to ask a question, and then while I'm asking that question, Nura, after we're done answering it, can you give us a list of books that we should use or we should read so that we can read up on it? Right? I'm gonna ask you to work on that.
Racism Without Racists.
Racism Without Racists. That's a book?
That's it. That is a book. Racism Without Racists. How people think. Yeah, that's it. Racism Without Racists.
You have your light summer reading here.
There you go.
Heard on TSN. Racism Without Racists. Okay, so there was a part of the discussion that really infuriated me. And so I'm going to take a step back and allow, and have you guys speak to it first before I rage. There was a part of the discussion regarding Nabra's murder that revolved around men. All right. And first off, it's problematic in a way that there was a lot of discussion about men when this young woman died, and there's so much danger to women, Muslim women who are obviously Muslim. And a lot of men get to pass without being Muslim. But there's a discussion about raising real men, and that real men should have stood up and protected Nabra when the attacker came at that group of kids. And I'm wondering if this discussion is as prevalent as it seemed on Facebook, and especially in the wider community. So like in your community, Lida, where you're working, was there a discussion like that about raising real men and how real men should protect their women, et cetera, et cetera?
To be honest with you, I haven't heard that discussion, but I'm not surprised if it was there. I think that discussion's always there, right? Whenever a woman is attacked, it's always this like, where were the men? Where were the defenders? Why did they run away? All of these questions, right? And I think that's really unfair, to be honest with you, at that point. Like, I don't know if we really know the details either. I know that everyone started running away, and maybe you didn't look back, right? Like, to me, honestly, what I'm worried about is her friends feeling guilty about this, right? Like, what if we look back? What if we stopped? Or what if, like, you know, we didn't all run? Like, that's, to me, that's what's going to kill them. And that's something they have to live with for the rest of their lives too. So that question is beside the point to me. Like, that shouldn't even be asked.
I think for me, or Arash, you wanted to say something? Please go, man.
No, I think it's very toxic when we say things like real men and try to differentiate between like good and bad, because men are men, and like a lot of men cause a lot of harm and violence, a lot of times, if not most of the time, on women. So we should be really careful when we, you know, even President Obama has used this thing saying, oh, like, real men don't do this. Well, you know, that doesn't help anybody, and it certainly like reinforces, like, it just feeds into this toxic masculinity rather than like men having to like take a responsibility for their fellow men. Men are men, and they commit violence, and that's the end of that story. It does not make anybody feel better when we differentiate between real or not real men.
I think both of you said exactly what I wanted to say, just in a much more polite and with less cursing. So I agree with both of you. I don't think that manhood should be equated with being a superhero. And I think that asking kids, teenagers, to stand up to an attacker is asking them to be Superman, and that's not manhood. Yeah, it's like I said before, it's weird to have that combo when Nabra was the one who was murdered, and suddenly we're talking about guys. Right? And for me, at least, it sort of highlights the privilege that men have in Muslim conversations. Any event, it always comes back to dudes. Dudes should have done this. Dudes should have done that. Dudes could have protected, the Muslim community. And I think that equating manhood with that kind of omnipresent power is hard, and it's kind of a myth that we've created.
And the impact that conversation has, like when someone gets up and gives a khutbah on be a real man, what are you telling young boys? Who are the people, these lone attackers that go commit mass acts of violence? They're men. And so what caused this toxic masculinity has consequences. So I don't understand, like, So when this myth gets reinforced, it's almost reinforcing the violence that we see being perpetuated. And I'm not a gender expert. I think Lita and I and all of us, we live and operate in these socialized norms. Like as women, we see it one way. As men, we see it one way. It's weird.
Yeah, it's sort of putting the onus on the kids and blaming them, which I think is,
and they're not the villains here.
Yeah, it's completely inappropriate. So thank you for helping me process my feelings about that, everybody. I wanted to end this discussion on a couple questions centered around moving forward, specifically with, there are communities, and I think, Lita, you work with some of these communities that aren't as strong as Adams, that aren't as capable or cohesive, or who can't really maintain a strong relationship with law enforcement. So how can smaller groups like that best survive without the intense relationship with law enforcement?
Okay. It's weird because some people in the mosque, they believe in working with law enforcement, like their own congregation, and then some of them don't. My recommendation would be to like find the balance. I think Adams does a good job of finding the balance from what I know from the outside, which is like still cooperating with them. Like, because what else can you really do? That's my little input in that. Because it's difficult to find the balance between the two.
So if it's difficult to find the balance for a masjid, how do we, as like people, just people who go to the masjid, maybe we only go there for Eid, maybe we only go there for Tarraweh prayers and we don't go any other time of the year, maybe we go there every Friday. How do we as people stay safe and with all of these events continuing to happen?
I think one way to continue is to continue just doing what we did before. Maybe with a little bit of awareness, not to be in like denial of what's happening. So like maybe women should be taking self-defense classes, and maybe like Adams, I'm sure Adams will take like some certain steps that is going to safeguard their community even further. But in a personal sense, people can take self-defense classes and things like that, but also just to keep doing what you were doing. You know what I mean? Like, it's sad, but like Ramadan is going to be there at Adams next year, for example, and people are going to go to that IHOP again, and we're going to eat at the McDonald's again at 3 a.m. So do we just, and in a way, we have to keep persisting. And I don't think we have much of a choice.
To me, I think it's just, I agree with that, but also to have more precautions, right? So Nora and I were talking about downloading that app. Like, it sucks that we have to do that, but at least that's like one step towards like not having something like that to happen. Like Nora goes running. Like I am privileged in the way that I don't wear a hijab, and so no one can identify me as being Muslim. So Nora could like text me, hey, this is my location, or share my location, and go forward with that. But I agree, like, you know, you can't just let these events stop you from living.
Nora, what you got?
I think that I'm still honestly processing a lot of emotions, and I felt a sense of loneliness at certain times in the week that I haven't felt in a long time, and I don't know what makes Sunday different than Chapel Hill, or my mosque had a bomb placed in it years ago. You can find the news online. Like, this stuff has been happening in our communities for years, and the only thing that's getting me through it is when friends reach out. And I remember the first text message I got when it happened was like, it's okay if you need to cry, and if you need someone to talk to, let me know that I'm there. So for me, moving forward is what we need to do, but I think we also have to give ourselves times to sit with our emotions and to grieve. And I feel guilty that I feel like I'm grieving even though I'm not from Adams, and I've never had the privilege of knowing this young woman. But I feel that way, and I think part of it's that I think for the first time I'm acknowledging that I feel like there is a level of danger to publicly identifying as Muslim. And I think that that's a realization that I've recently come to, that I'm still, I don't think it's me that has to change. I think it's the society that has to change. I refuse to give up my freedom of religious expression, but I'm also conscious that my decision has consequences, and I'm dealing with what that means for me and what that means for our community. But having this space and community to turn to is the only thing that kind of keeps me going in these moments.
I really like that you said that. I think it's the society that needs to change, and it's not me that needs to change, because it reminds me of my mom's reaction to 9/11, where she considered, after 9/11, she considered wearing the headscarf.
Wow.
Yeah, because she's stubborn and she's an Afghan mom.
That's badass.
And so, like, I mean, when events like these happen, I'm always reminded of that kind of ferocity on her part, and how I hope that we can channel the fear that we have and the pain that we have into grit. To be, that's the cuckoo clock. I'm sorry.
That's kind of awesome. I think that's like God's or someone's way of, that's their like snaps to when you're saying something great.
But yeah, channel that fear and that pain into grit so that we can, as Arash said, persist. I wanted to leave the floor to you three to close with any final thoughts that you may have before we sign off. So I'll begin with Arash.
On a sad note, this was the worst week since Donald Trump's election. And, you know, like, I'm sure that was a terrible time for a lot of people. Not for everyone, but for marginalized communities and for brown and Muslim communities. I've been crying a lot, and like, I haven't even gone to Adams in such a long time. You know, my piousness has decreased a lot, and I haven't gone to the mosque. I go for like certain events, but I still feel so connected to that mosque and so to everyone that went there. And I think it's okay to grieve, and it's okay to process, and it's okay to take your time. And it's okay to be sad, and it's okay to be upset. And we all channel that differently, and I think that's okay.
Lita.
No, I completely agree with Arash. I don't think I've really processed it, and I really think what comes to mind because of that is because I live so far away. And I really think that does affect my grieving process. Like, to me, it's when I read about the details of it, I get really upset and I kind of block it out. But again, it takes longer for me to grieve about these things than other people. So I agree with Arash, like, you know, take your time, talk to who you need to talk to. Don't be scared, even if it's like a month from now and you're like, hey, it's affected me and I need to talk to someone about this. And it's also good to be angry too, by the way, sorry. Because that's what happens, right? Like, I think this is what motivates people to be more active in the community. At least that's what happens to me.
I'm never one to say no to being angry. So I hear that.
I almost feel like putting in a plug for our summer camp, because it sucks. And I'm not being eloquent by saying that this sucks. It hurts. We're crying through it. And when I actually sit and think about the wounds, like, if our emotional wounds could actually physically manifest on our body, like, what would we look like as Afghans, as Muslims, as people who are mistaken for being Muslim, who are Sikh, who don't look Muslim, like anyone that passes as this racial lumped other, Black, Latino, whatever. And for like Afghans, like we do have a summer program coming up in August, and the thing that gives me hope is that I know I have a community to turn to and a space to organize, and it fuels me to continue. And when I want to lose hope, my community is what keeps me going to not give up, and reminds me that I'm not alone. And this conversation reminds me that I'm not alone, and I'm honored that we have this place and this platform and places like Adept to turn to in times like this particularly.
Thanks so much for ending us on that awesome note, Nurajan. I wanted to thank all of you for sticking around with us and processing with us and watching us discuss this. If you have things to say, the discussion's not over. And you can join us on our Facebook page, on the Facebook event page, to give us your thoughts and your opinions and share with us your emotions and your feelings. Thank you for watching the Sound Network tonight, and we will see you soon.